There he was, my boyfriend, Caspian, smiling in his wedding photos. I'm sitting here in the dark, the only light coming from my phone screen, and I can barely breathe. My hands are shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone twice, but I can't look away. I can't blink. Because right there, frozen in pixels and lies, is the man I just forgave 3 weeks ago, dressed in a tuxedo, looking happier than I've ever seen him. And that's when I told my grandmother's lawyer to invoke the character clause. Mr. Davenport asked if I was sure, his voice careful and measured on the other end of the line. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. But the person Caspian was standing next to at the altar wasn't just some random woman. It was my stepsister, Serafina, Sarah. The same Sarah who held me while I ugly cried into her shoulder just weeks ago, telling me everything would be okay, that Caspian was just confused, that men make mistakes. And what they didn't know? This was never about a wedding. This was about a heist, and I was about to turn the tables on them completely. Have you ever been betrayed so badly it felt like the world stopped spinning? Let me know in the comments if you know this feeling, because my world wasn't just spinning, it was about to explode. It's funny what you'll believe when you're desperate for something to be true. Just 3 weeks before my world ended, Caspian sat across from me in our favorite coffee shop, performing the role of a lifetime. He had actual tears in his eyes. Actual tears. I watched one roll down his cheek and actually felt guilty for making him cry. The rain was coming down hard outside, streaking the windows. And the whole place had that cozy, intimate vibe that makes you feel like you're in a bubble separated from the rest of the world. I remember thinking how cinematic it all felt, how perfectly tragic and romantic. God, I was such an idiot. He slid his phone across the table, the screen showing a string of deleted texts and a blocked number. His voice, that smooth, confident voice I fell in love with, was engineered to crack in just the right places. I know that now. Every hesitation, every break, every time his eyes got glassy, it was all calculated. It was a mistake, Alara, he said, and his hand was trembling as he reached for mine. One night. Too much to drink at that conference, she meant nothing. You are my entire world. Every alarm bell in my body was screaming, my stomach was churning, and there was this cold, heavy weight pressing down on my chest. But I ignored it. Have you ever done that? Ignored that cold, sinking certainty because the truth was just too destructive to face? Because accepting what your gut is telling you means accepting that your entire life is about to change, and you're not ready for that kind of earthquake? I looked at his phone, at the carefully curated evidence he was showing me. Blocked number, deleted messages, a screenshot of him telling this mystery woman to never contact him again. It all looked so convincing, so final. And when I looked back up at his face, he looked so broken, so genuinely devastated by what he'd done, that I felt my resolve cracking. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said, and my voice sounded small even to my own ears. I know, he said immediately, squeezing my hand. I know, and I don't deserve your trust, but I'll spend every day for the rest of my life earning it back. I'll do anything, Alara. Anything. The first few days after that conversation were a masterclass in manipulation, though I didn't know it at the time. He was perfect. Attentive without being suffocating. Apologetic without being pathetic. He sent me good morning texts with little inside jokes that made me smile despite myself. He left my favorite coffee on my desk at work with notes that said things like, "Thinking of you always." He suggested couples therapy, bought books about rebuilding trust, did all the things that a genuinely remorseful person would do. But now I know he was just reinforcing the cage. I should have seen the signs. They were everywhere, bright red flags waving frantically in my peripheral vision. But I was too in love, too invested, too stupidly hopeful to pay attention. Like the way he always made jokes about money, about how careful I was with it, how I actually checked my bank account before making purchases, how I preferred cooking at home to dropping $300 on dinner. He'd laugh and call me practical in that tone that made it sound like an insult, like being financially responsible was somehow quaint and small-minded. "Come on, Alara, live a little," he'd say when I suggested we skip the $1,000 weekend trip to wine country and do something more reasonable. "You can't take it with you, right? What's the point of having money if you don't enjoy it?" At the time, I thought he was just more spontaneous than me, more willing to embrace life. Now I know he was prospecting, testing my relationship with money, figuring out exactly how much I had and how easily I could be convinced to spend it. And Serafina. God, Serafina. My quiet, fragile stepsister who came into my life when we were both 15 and our parents got married. She was always so timid, so shy, always seeming to fade into the background at family gatherings. She had this way of making herself seem harmless, like she needed protecting. Our parents always worried about her more than me because she seemed so vulnerable, so overwhelmed by life. After I first found out about Caspian's supposed cheating, she was the first person I called. I couldn't face my parents yet, couldn't handle the disappointment in my dad's eyes or my stepmom's well-meaning but ultimately useless advice. But Sarah had always been safe. Neutral. Someone who would just listen. I drove to her apartment at midnight, mascara streaking down my face, barely able to see through the tears. She opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at me, and pulled me inside. She made me tea. She let me ramble and rage and sob on her couch for hours. She held me while I cried until I had nothing left, rubbing my back and making soothing sounds, telling me I deserved better, that Caspian was an idiot, that I was strong enough to get through this, all while secretly coordinating with him under the table. All while her thumb flew across her phone screen, probably telling him exactly what I was saying, what I was feeling, what I was likely to do next. At family dinners over the years, they were perfect strangers, polite but distant. Caspian would nod at her when he arrived. She'd give him a small, shy smile and then immediately look away, like eye contact was too much for her delicate constitution. They never sat near each other, never had conversations longer than, "Could you pass the salt?" They were professionals, and I was their mark. I remember one dinner, maybe 6 months ago, where my dad was asking Caspian about his job. Caspian worked in finance, something vague with investment portfolios that I never fully understood because every time he explained it, my eyes glazed over. But he was good at it. Or at least, he was good at seeming like he was good at it. "So you manage people's assets?" my stepmom asked, serving herself more of her famous lasagna. "In a way," Caspian said with that charming smile, "I help clients make smart decisions about their long-term financial security, estate planning, trust management, that sort of thing." Trust management. The words didn't mean anything to me then. Now they make my blood run cold. Sarah was sitting at the far end of the table picking at her food, barely saying a word like always. But I remember catching her eye once just for a second, and she gave me this small, supportive smile, like she was happy to see me happy, like she cared about me. They must have laughed about that later, about how easy I was to fool, about how I never suspected a thing. The breaking point came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I couldn't sleep, which had become my new normal since the cheating incident. I'd lie there in the dark with Caspian snoring peacefully beside me, because of course he could sleep. He had nothing to feel guilty about because this was all part of the plan, and my mind would race in endless circles. I was scrolling through social media, just trying to numb my brain enough to maybe doze off for a few hours, when I saw a name I hadn't seen in years. Melissa Rodriguez. We went to high school together. We're decent friends back then, but drifted apart like people do. She'd moved to Austin after college, and I'd stayed in Dallas, and our lives just went in different directions. But she'd tagged Serafina in a photo album. My thumb hovered over it for a second, curiosity winning over exhaustion. The album title hit me like a punch to the gut, A Perfect Hill Country Wedding. I clicked. The first photo was scenic. Rolling hills, a rustic barn venue, that golden hour light that photographers kill for. Pretty. Elegant. The kind of wedding you pin on Pinterest boards. The second photo made my heart stop. It wasn't just a picture of two guests. Caspian was in a tuxedo. Not just any tuxedo. A custom one, the kind with perfect tailoring and actual cufflinks. His boutonniere matched the wedding colors. He was standing at what was clearly an altar, and he was smiling. Really smiling. That genuine, unguarded smile I thought was reserved just for me. And next to him, holding a massive bouquet of white roses and peonies, wearing a lace wedding dress that probably cost more than my car, was Serafina. My stepsister. My shy, fragile, wouldn't-hurt-a-fly stepsister was a bride. His bride. I zoomed in on the photo with shaking hands, certain I was misunderstanding, that maybe they were just members of the wedding party, that there was some logical explanation that would make this make sense. But the next photo showed them feeding each other a piece of wedding cake, laughing, frosting on his nose. The next showed their hands, fingers intertwined, identical gold wedding bands catching the light. The next was their first dance, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. Both of them looking at each other like they were the only two people in the world. These weren't just wedding photos. These were their wedding photos. I zoomed in on the date stamp at the bottom of the album, the one that Melissa's phone had automatically added. It was from 2 months ago. 2 months ago. Let me paint you a picture of where I was 2 months ago. Caspian and I were planning a trip to Colorado. He was staying at my apartment 4 nights a week. We were talking about moving in together officially, about maybe getting a dog, about the future. I was completely, blissfully happy. And the entire time, he was married to my stepsister. Okay, I have to stop for a second. I'm sitting here looking at photos of my boyfriend, who I just forgave for cheating, who I just agreed to work things out with, who is currently asleep in my bed in the next room, married to my stepsister. What is the very first thing you would do? Blow up their phones? Call your parents? Storm into the bedroom and start screaming? Or just sit there in silence, letting the poison seep in, trying to make your brain process something that doesn't make any sense? Let's see what I did. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, just staring at my phone, scrolling through photo after photo. There were at least 50 in the album. The ceremony, the reception, the cutting of the cake, the bouquet toss, Sarah's face, flushed and happy, laughing at something someone said, Caspian's hand on the small of her back, proprietary and comfortable. Guest photos where they posed with people I didn't recognize, playing the happy newlyweds. And then, like a lightning bolt, a memory hit me so hard I actually gasped out loud. My grandmother, Nana. She passed away a year and a half ago, and I still miss her every single day. She was the one who raised me when my mom died during my childhood, who taught me to be careful with money, to value security, to plan for the future. She never liked Caspian. I introduced them at a family dinner about 2 years into our relationship, and afterward, she pulled me aside in her kitchen. "That young man has a salesman's smile and empty eyes," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "He looked at you the same way a jeweler looks at a diamond. Like you're something to be appraised." I'd laughed it off, told her she was being paranoid, that Caspian was just nervous about meeting her. But she'd held my face in her soft, wrinkled hands and looked at me with those sharp gray eyes that never missed anything. "I'm not saying he doesn't care about you, sweetheart. I'm saying, make sure you know what he cares about more." She left me everything. Her house, which we sold and split the proceeds with my dad. Her jewelry, most of which I still have in a safe deposit box. And her trust fund, a sizable inheritance that her own parents had set up decades ago and that she'd carefully maintained her entire life. It was meant to set me up for life. Down payment on a house, emergency fund, retirement security, freedom. The lawyer had explained the terms during the reading of the will. I got access to a small monthly stipend immediately, but the bulk of it was locked in a trust until I turned 30, which was still 3 years away. Unless I got married. If I got married, I could access the full amount with my spouse's name on the paperwork too. At the time, I barely paid attention. I was grieving, overwhelmed, and the money felt secondary to the loss of the woman who'd been my anchor my entire life. But now, sitting in the dark with my phone showing me photos of my boyfriend's secret wedding, that conversation came rushing back with perfect clarity. I tore my apartment apart until I found the folder. It was shoved in the back of my filing cabinet under a stack of old tax returns, buried like I'd been trying to forget about it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Paper cuts forming on my fingers as I rifled through the pages. And then I saw it. A subclause, Section 4, Paragraph B. In the event that the primary beneficiary, Ilara Rose Nightingale, enters into a legally recognized marriage, the secondary party, spouse, will be granted joint managerial access to the trust's financial advisor for the purposes of shared household financial planning. This access includes the ability to authorize transfers, investments, and withdrawals with the approval of both parties. My grandmother thought it was a safety net, a way to make sure that if I got married, my spouse and I could build a life together without legal complications. She was trying to protect me, to make things easier. They saw it as a target. This wasn't a relationship. This wasn't love. This was a con. A long, elaborate, meticulously planned con, and I was the mark. I needed proof. Real proof. Not just wedding photos that I could be gaslit into thinking I'd misunderstood somehow. I needed to see the plan laid out in black and white. I remembered an old cloud storage account that Caspian and I shared. We'd set it up during senior year of college for a group project, and then just kept using it occasionally to share photos or documents. I hadn't accessed it in months, maybe even over a year. I prayed he was arrogant enough not to delete it, that his confidence in his plan made him sloppy. He was. I logged in with our old password, his mother's maiden name, plus my birth year, because of course he'd used information about both of us to make it seem more legitimate. The account opened and I started clicking through folders, old college papers, some shared photos from a trip we took to New Orleans, a folder of apartment listings from when we were talking about moving in together, and then, buried in a folder labeled Old Coursework, I found another folder. It was titled Project Nightingale. My grandmother's last name was Nightingale. My hands were so sweaty I could barely control the mouse, but I clicked it open. Inside wasn't a project. It was their entire plan. Scanned documents of my grandmother's will. Screenshots of the trust fund terms. A detailed financial statement showing exactly how much money was in the trust. Printouts of real estate listings in Serafina's browsing history. A spreadsheet breaking down projected expenses and profit margins. And buried at the bottom, a scanned PDF of a signed, notarized prenuptial agreement between Caspian Vance and Serafina Martinez. I opened it and started reading, my vision blurring at the edges because I couldn't seem to remember how to breathe properly. The prenup was cold, clinical. It read more like a business contract than a marriage document. It outlined that their marriage was for strategic financial purposes. That all assets acquired during the marriage would be split according to a predetermined formula. That in the event of divorce there would be no spousal support, no extended legal battles, just a clean break. And then I got to the addendum, the part that made my stomach drop through the floor. Upon successful acquisition and transfer of the Nightingale Trust assets, the secondary party, Serafina Martinez, will be granted a one-time severance payment of $150,000. Following this payment, the primary party, Caspian Vance, assumes all remaining assets and management thereof. All ties between parties are legally severed, and the marriage will be dissolved within 90 days of asset transfer. After they secured my money, Caspian was going to divorce Serafina. He was giving her a cut, a relatively small cut, all things considered, and then disappearing with the rest. With my grandmother's life savings. With my future. He wasn't just playing me, he was playing his new wife, too. Sarah thought she was going to be rich, thought she was pulling off the heist of a lifetime with her new husband. She didn't realize she was just another disposable pawn in his game. Some tiny vindictive part of me almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I sat back from my laptop, and something shifted inside me. The panic was gone. The heartbreak was gone, the desperate need to understand, to find some explanation that would make this hurt less, all gone. What replaced it was a cold, crystalline fury, the kind that doesn't make you scream or cry, the kind that makes you dangerously, perfectly calm. And in that moment, the victim died. They wouldn't just be told no. They wouldn't just lose access to my money. That wasn't enough. Not even close. They would learn a lesson. A lesson written in the language they understood best. Absolute ruin. I scrolled through my contacts with steady hands, past Dad, who I couldn't tell yet because he'd try to protect me and talk me into just walking away. Past Mom, which was actually my stepmom, who would dissolve into tears and make this about her feelings. Past Serafina Martinez, I'd changed her name in my phone from Sarah about 30 seconds after seeing the wedding photos, until I found the name I was looking for. Mr. Davenport, Nana's lawyer. I looked at the clock. 4:47 a.m. Too early to call. But I saved a draft email with the subject line, Urgent, Trust Fund Security Breach. And then I went back to bed. I slid under the covers next to Caspian, careful not to wake him, and just watched him sleep. His face was so peaceful, so innocent looking in the dark. He had no idea that the person lying next to him wasn't his meal ticket anymore. She was his executioner. I waited until 9 a.m. after Caspian had left for work with a kiss on my forehead and a promise to pick up dinner on his way back. Then I sent the email to Mr. Davenport and sat by my phone, waiting. He called me back within 20 minutes. Ilara. His voice was warm but concerned. I got your email. What's going on? Mr. Davenport, it's about my grandmother's trust. Specifically, Section 7, the Character and Conduct Clause. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Nana set up the trust, she'd included a clause that allowed the trustee to freeze access if there was evidence that someone was attempting to defraud the estate or manipulate the beneficiary for financial gain. It was an old-fashioned provision, something from a time when people were more suspicious of fortune hunters and gold diggers. Go on, he said carefully. I need to invoke it. I have evidence that my boyfriend has been conducting a long-term con to gain access to the trust through a fraudulent marriage. He's currently married to my stepsister. Yes, legally married. I have photos. And they've drawn up documents planning exactly how they'll drain the account once they trick me into marrying him. Another pause. Longer this time. These are serious allegations, Ilara. I know. I can send you everything. The wedding photos, the prenuptial agreement between them, the entire folder they kept of documents about Nana's estate, all of it. Send it all to my secured email address. All of it. And Ilara? Yes? Don't confront them. Don't tell them you know. Not yet. If what you're telling me is true, we need to be very careful about how we proceed. I smiled for the first time in hours. It probably didn't look like a nice smile. Don't worry, Mr. Davenport, I can be very patient when I need to be. So that's where we are. They drew first blood, but I'm about to go to war. Some might say I should just walk away, protect my peace, cut them off, and let the lawyers handle it quietly. Block them both, move on with my life, and count myself lucky that I found out before actually marrying him. Others would say that I need to personally burn their entire world to the ground, that people like this don't learn unless they face real consequences, that I have a moral obligation to make sure they never do this to anyone else. What do you think? Am I right to pursue this, or is revenge a fool's game? Cast your vote in the comments. Justice or peace? Because I need to know if I'm crazy for what I'm about to do, or if you do the same thing in my position. If you want to see how I use a lawyer, a private investigator, and their own greed against them, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. In part 2, we stop reacting and we start dismantling this house of lies brick by brick. I promise you, you won't want to miss what happens when Caspian realizes he picked the wrong target. See you in the next one.